It's Wizards versus Lesbians, a podcast for your ears. Hello and welcome to Wizards versus Lesbians. My name is Isaac.
I'm Alexis.
And today we're talking about The Breath of the Sun by Isaac Fellman.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about the plot, or shall I?
I think it's your turn.
All right. So often I start this by saying we're in fantasy such and such and so, but this book isn't quite anywhere in the real world. It's kind of like a lot of things, but it is exactly like nothing, which is a thing that I really enjoy about it. But in this world, there's a mountain, and there are people who live on this mountain who believe that the mountain is the body of God. And our hero, whose name is, help me out.
Lamont Payed, I think?
Yes. Whose name is Lamont, has already tried to climb the mountain in defiance of the beliefs of her people, and lost a lot in the attempt. And she is happily enough, an innkeeper on the slopes of the mountain, having written a book about her experience, which brought a lot of tourists in to try to climb the mountain, until a wandering priest academic, a 60-year-old woman named Desane,
Mother Desane,
yes, comes into her life and convinces her to try to climb the mountain again. And you
this
can probably
time with gear.
Yes, and there are consequences to that decision.
Are there consequences?
Yes, and I think that's the basic layout of the book.
Yes, I'm just going to note that the framing device for this book is Lamont writing her, the second volume of her memoirs, the first volume being her basically fantasy into thin air. And her partner, lover, wife, we're not entirely sure, is occasionally annotating.
Yes, indeed.
Which we can talk more about that post-spoiler zone, but...
Yes. So are there lesbians in this book? Obviously.
Yes.
And Mother Desane is a classic wizard.
Yeah, she's absolutely a wizard. She uses magic, and she is hella manipulative. Yep.
And they have the kind of uncomfortable conflict that is sort of the fine wine of the Wizards versus Lesbians scenario.
Yes.
Why should you read this book?
I mean, I thought it was good. It's really interesting. It is, in fact, weird. This was shout out to whoever recommended this to us for saying that it was weird and you loved it, because I thought it was weird and I really enjoyed it. It's got it uses its framing device really well, which is rare. The Lamont has a strong narrative voice, and it's, if you like mountain climbing adventures that end badly, but you want that,
i.e. all mountain climbing adventures.
Exactly. If you read Into Thin Air and thought, what this needs is some lesbians and a wizard, then this is obviously the book for you.
Yes. I actually, I don't think of this book as weird. I think of this book as literary. I think that if I were to comp this book, I would have said Slow River meets, Into Thin Air or whatever.
Yeah, that's not a bad comp.
It's it has that sort of high literary, we're playing with form and structure, and tossing off, insights as asides, and like sort of hiding the, we're playing a little, sort of shuffle game where we're hiding the themes from the audience and playing with unreliability and that kind of stuff. But in addition to that, it's also like a gripping adventure yarn, in some ways, and a weird sort of Le Guin anthropological study in other ways. I thought it was really, really good.
Yeah.
Why shouldn't you read it?
Well, if, mountain climbing disasters are not your thing, don't read it, I guess. It's not even that long. Like, I guess really, if you're the if you like most of the books in this that we've covered in this podcast that we've actually recommended, and you don't like have a specific problem with any of the content warnings, then I don't see why you shouldn't read this book.
Yeah, I would say if content warning grad school was a problem for you before.
Speaking of
warning,
which, yes, content warning, very much, advisor grad student relationship. The author has also written a book that I believe is fantasy, but that is specifically about like an abusive advisor, grad student advisor relationship, which I believe I have already placed on hold at the library.
Yes, if you couldn't tell that the author was an archivist from his bio, you could tell from the book. This has Kiana brought up Borges. There's some labyrinthine stuff going on here. If you're upset, if you found Viv upsetting in the outside, you will find Mother Desane perhaps even more upsetting, because she's more vulnerable than Mother Desane, and than Viv was, and therefore kind of even worse.
Yes,
and
you do. Well, we can talk more about that post spoiler zone. I would like to briefly hijack this podcast to make a public service announcement.
Oh, please do.
So, an unfortunate thing with this book is that the author's dead name appears in the metadata, even though the author's name is, correctly on the cover and in the copy. And so I would just like to note that Onyx has a roles function where even if your title management software insists on using the author's legal name, putting that into the metadata, and you also need your title management software to use and have the author's legal name, you can use the roles function in Onyx, which hopefully your title management software has, to set a pen name for your author. And you should absolutely do that if you are a small press who is, for example, trying not to dead name your author.
That is a very good point.
This has concluded our public service announcement.
Yes. On a related point, I found the audiobook, which was published a few years after the print version of the book under the author's current name. Despite that, I must recommend not doing the audiobook for this one. It's not terrible, but you will find, I think, that following all the footnoting and asides and different voices and excerpts of various different people talking to be easier to follow via text. And the audiobook also wasn't proofed, and so there are some pretty significant pronunciation errors and stuff which may detract from your enjoyment. So I would recommend doing the text version.
Mm-hmm.
Even if you must delve into the author's dead name in order to find it.
You don't. That's the thing, is that the text version doesn't have it. It's just some of the websites have it, like Amazon, for example. And this is why, so clearly the publisher has made a real effort to use the author's name and not, his dead name. But they just haven't quite figured out how to push all their metadata to the appropriate places.
This has been Alexis's Publishing Tips. Okay, good to know. There we go. Additional content warnings, body horror, which you're gonna get that with climbing mountains. I almost want to say content warning mountain climbing, because
honestly,
there's so many uniquely and specifically
climbing.
Awful things that happen with mountain climbing, and this book is this author who's clearly done the research and knows exactly how bad things get and in what ways. That is upsetting, and also, bad wizard, and I don't think, and
there's a briefly mentioned domestic violence, with the suggestion that there may have been other domestic violence.
Yes. Yeah. And this is a sexist world and a homophobic world, although that isn't really the point of the book, but that is the world in which the book takes place.
Yes.
Shall we proceed to the spoiler zone then?
Let's.
I knocked the tuning peg off my guitar, so I'm playing my wife's guitar. It's a perfectly reasonable guitar in the spoiler zone. All right. So yeah, no, I thought this book was really good.
Yeah, me too. I really, picked it up and took it on a hike, though not up onto a mountain. And, my sitting and reading breaks lasted way longer than they usually do because I kept not wanting to put the book down.
Yeah. So there are a bunch of different places to sort of go into discussing this. I almost want to go into the littler, subtler things first because I think that that's sort of where the book excels.
Yeah.
This is a book full of like little sort of details and digressions, and like and I appreciate a book where the main character. I mean, first of all, I like a book where the main character is a writer because then, the fact that they write in a writerly way makes sense. And
yes.
they're, writing a book. But also, I love a book where, like, really, where, like, they can just casually drop a bowling ball on your foot with an aside. They can bring you up short with something and then breeze on because it's just the author sort of thinking out loud before getting back to the story. And that happened a bunch of times in this one. And I think that sort of matches up with the way that this book is about a lot of things in the real world without matching one to one up with any of them.
Yeah. It's about Mount Everest and that sort of entire industry, and it's about abusive relationships and, and it's about tourism, and it's about,
it's about indigenous people and about
indigenous people
and decolonization.
Yeah, but
also I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to remember any names right now because I'm tired. But her people are not Jewish, but they're kind of Jews.
The Holo, yeah.
Yeah, the Holo are not Jews, but they're kind of Jews, in addition to being not like Sherpas, but kind of Sherpas. And
like they're living they're living in diaspora. But sort of the opposite, because they are living in diaspora on their holy land that they're not supposed to be in.
Right. Which is really, really interesting. But you still get a lot of, relatable little things about being a diasporic people,
Yes.
And also about being a people with like specific with cultural practices that are, and the way that are sort of seen in a sort of simultaneously philic and phobic way by the larger culture. The ways in which the outsiders think of the Holo people and sort of conceive of them, and like the way that she talks about reading books about the Holo people and how it kind of changes, it makes it so that she can't actually sort of go home untainted having read these books about,
and honestly, the way that, the way that she has all of these extremely heterodox beliefs, and that's fine, but it only becomes an issue when she starts to do the specific things that are forbidden by, by her people's religion.
Right.
And that even then, it's much more a matter of, your community standing, whether or not you're going to get kicked out versus like, oh, well, you were probably just doing what your husband wanted.
Yes, exactly. And it's like the sort of the casual sexist dismissal of her affront against God because, she's a silly girl who, clearly didn't mean to affront against God in this way and probably won't do it again. It was all her husband's doing. And in fact, really what gets them to kick her out is that her friend, quote unquote, just wants her property.
Right.
And so pushes to have her excommunicated at that point. It's like, I love a book which is like, well, yes, these people this is a people who have been affected by empire, and pushed to the edges of the world by empire.
And that is not going to stop them from being petty assholes.
They're not cartoonishly virtuous.
Yes.
and in fact, it turns out that being pushed to the end of the world and being, marginalized and being, othered in all of these ways can actually make you worse and like
Yes.
more of an asshole. And so, it's, treating it's once again the, when all that noble savage shit gets up my nose so much, because it's like, no, like being brutalized makes people brutal,
Or it doesn't, but it certainly doesn't grant
but
any sort of special virtue.
it certainly isn't a charm against being brutal,
Right.
having been brutalized, as we see over and over again in the world.
Yeah.
And
No, the entire depiction of the Holo and Lamott's relationship. Also, and actually another thing that was very relatable, what with the was that the nobody knows how to Romanize anything in their language correctly.
Yes. There's all. I love the way that this book deals with language. Can I just say?
Yes. Yes, and
like,
it does a really good job of using it's because it's actually written in very like colloquial modern English. It's not written in a sort of much more sort of distant, formal fantasy or sci-fi register where they've like carefully stripped out all the things like okay, but
yeah.
But it shows sort of little things where it's like, wait, but what's okay?
Right.
Just to indicate that you can be quite fluent in the dominant language, and there's still going to be bits of colloquialisms that you're not going to get because somebody's coming from a different region.
Yes. And another thing that I really enjoy about this book is that in a lot of fantasy books, it's like there's a sort of assumption that we are having another language magically translated into English for us. Like these characters aren't speaking, English, because why would they be speaking English in the far future?
Right.
Or in, the fantastic past, we're just getting to read it as if it were in English. But no, the dominant language in this place is English. But
right.
Its etymologies are all different and weird.
Yes. Oh, I love all the weird etymologies so much.
Yeah, because there's no Catholics in here, so excommunicate doesn't come from the same place. So she, stops and because she's a word nerd, the author of this book, as befits an author,
The author of this book, not the actual author, Isaac Feldman, but Lamott, the author.
I mean,
of
also
the
probably
story.
the author of this book, but specifically, yes, Lamott is a word nerd.
When we're talking about the author, generally in this, I think when we say the author, we're going to mean Lamott because the author is dead and all.
Yes.
And also being dead named by the metadata.
Yes.
So, yeah, no, the fake, like the weird etymologies to explain why these things make sense are great. They're very convincing, and I think part of and they also actually help with the framing device. I want to transition now into talking about why I really like the way the framing device is done. Because a lot of books will use fake memoir or historical document or whatever as their framing device, but they're just not willing to commit to it.
Right.
It doesn't partly because usually when you commit to it, like if you want a realistic example of a lot of these things, it's going to be actually really bad. It's going to be boring. It's going to have all this cruft that, an editor would edit out. What makes this work partly is that, she's already a professional writer, so it makes sense that this will read well. The digressions, and so instead the digressions are used for world building, but again, done fairly subtly. It's, oh, well, you, my lover from another culture, may not know this about us, so I'm just going to note it here. And it comes out very stream of consciousness-y. But also, I really like the way that the framing device is used to really make it clear that Lamott is an unreliable narrator. And
yeah.
And that she's an unreliable narrator partly because she's lying to herself. Watching all the places. One of my favorite moments is when Oteil, her lover, is has been leaving all of these sort of back and forth annotations, and some of which are actual comments on the factual content of what she's saying, or extra context, and some of them are more like, honey, I wish you'd woken me up instead of writing all this sad stuff because you couldn't sleep.
Yeah.
But the moment where she's talking about a specific thing that she's, exchange that she's having with Dessain, and these like feelings that she's having about, being like feeling this bond with Dessain, and O'Teal just going, oh no, oh honey, no.
Yeah. Yeah.
And just, it was this really human moment where you could really, connect with the annotator and also the original writer in such a real human way. And it also worked really well for reminding you, oh yes, Lamont is not telling us the truth, she's not telling O'Teal the truth, and she's not telling herself the truth.
Yes, exactly. Like, this is a book which does nothing for no reason. The metatextual elements are pulling like double and triple duty, in addition to being a smooth way to get world building across. It's also a great insight into Lamott's character. And
like the words she chooses to get really into the etymology of. It's like,
yes.
She's having, she can't talk about her emotions about this, so she's going to deflect by getting really into etymology.
Yeah, and like and it's like we can tell what O'Teal specifically loves about Lamont, and we can see the result of Lamont having been this person who wasn't taken seriously and was thought of as like a dumb pretty girl for like most of her life,
until she became this sort of less pretty girl because she's lost the tip of her nose and chunks of her face to frostbite. But now she's just, the sad woman
that nobody wants to look at, right? But like the joy, the real pleasure that she takes in explaining things, and like diving into things and unpacking things, and the safety that she feels because, as she says, she's writing this book just for O'Teal. She's not even thinking about a wider audience for this one. But the safety that she feels with O'Teal means that there's this, despite the fact that O'Teal barely appears in this book, it's like one of the better and more profound feeling romantic relationships that I think we've covered.
Yeah, partly because you get to see the exchange between them before you see them meet, which is really nice.
Yes.
That's a really useful way of sort of playing with time. Without, introducing either time travel or flashbacks. So that works really well. And again,
sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, one of the things I like about this book is that it's so efficient, but not,
yes.
It doesn't feel efficient. Like, it's willing to stop and be beautiful, but it never wastes anything. Like you said, everything is working double and triple.
Yeah. And it packs so much into such little space. Like, as I say, there are just sentences here and there and paragraphs that are like, a worse author would have had this idea and been like, oh, I love this idea, I'm going to spend, pages talking about this, right?
Right, just so
but it's
the way that you can be really good at mountain climbing is because you really got to feel at home on the slope. This probably works better if you came from a bad home. Anyway.
Right, right, exactly. Like, she doesn't talk about her probably extremely fucked up childhood at all.
Right.
Just, in service of this other metaphor, she slips in, the way I grew up, it was like living on an ice wall.
And that's why I'm so at home on an ice wall, which is obviously not true. She's at home on an ice wall because, she is smart and, and canny and experienced at climbing. And and really passionate about it. But, this is clearly part of the story that she has told herself.
Right. And speaking of O'Teal's, the way that O'Teal interacts with her, and the unreliability, the way that, when Lamont is talking about the relationship and O'Teal is like, actually, I think that our relationship is based on how funny you are and how we joke together all the time.
And just
and Lamont has chosen not to put any of that side of her into the narrative
exactly.
at all.
It's this wonderful moment where you go, oh, wow. Again, she is telling a story. and she's trying to present herself in a specific way to O'Teal, and O'Teal is very kindly, delicately calling her on it, being like, I
Yes.
actually think that our shared, sense of humor and the fact that we can just be mopping the floors and saying the dumbest shit to each other that's really part of, the core of our relationship. And she just, she doesn't make any dumb jokes. And so you listen to O'Teal do that and you go, wow, okay.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a great comment on, it's a great way to remind us that she's an unreliable narrator but it's also a great
Yes.
way to remind us that all narrators are unreliable because they're, even if
Right,
you're talking
because
about
the
your own
act of
life,
telling a story is,
yeah, it's all
makes
about
you
what
a,
you choose to
a
include
narrator.
and what you don't. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that is super great.
Yeah. No, it's, and also the places where O'Teal, the side note where O'Teal's like, actually, come to think of it, this one hand washing custom of your people, speaking of, the Holo not being Jews, but also kind of being Jews, might be why your patients are just die less than everyone else's. I'm going to make a
Right.
side note about that because that's such a great insight into O'Teal. You're like, okay, this is the way her mind works.
Yes, but in addition, it also casts a different light on magic in this universe because it's like
Right.
it reminds us, oh, this is a world which doesn't have germ theory.
Yes.
They have trains and guns, but they don't have germ theory, and the
And they have the scientific method, but also they have magic, and it keeps screwing up with the scientific method, and the scientists are really annoyed about it.
right, and it's like, so when we think about what's plausible in this world and like how and the way that people are interacting with this, and we're still also in a stage where all of the scientists are religious. Like
Yes.
this is science is something that monks do in this world, and priests, and so it's like, it reminds you that this is a very different world with a very different set of moral, strictures and also ways of thinking about the world, and
Yes.
it makes us think about Mother Desane's magic and what that actually means, and the particular horror of having a friend or family member or lover who is a charlatan but can actually do it like half the time.
Yes. Yes.
Which
No, it's yeah, if you've known somebody who is very much a manipulative person, but who seems to just sometimes, who's like magic things sometimes seem to work. And
Yeah.
and you're never sure, is this magic or is this just really good placebo effect? Whatever on my,
Right. Like,
head
how
fuckery.
can charisma keep you alive without air? And in this world, I think maybe it can. And like
For a little
for whatever,
until it run, but it can only get you so far.
exactly, it's not going to get you to the top of the mountain. But then
For
there's
that,
the
you
question
need
of whether
rockets.
well, we'll see. I have my doubts.
No. I love it. Ends with Desane, turns over all of, says all of her earthly possessions, or at least her diaries, should be sent to Lamont. And then she does manage to con people out of the rocket, and they see the rocket go all the way up to the top of the mountain and crash.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And yeah, I actually liked that because it was, by this point the novel had earned a little bit of silly.
Yeah.
And specifically because Desane is such a larger-than-life figure that pretty much the only way you were ever going to get rid of her was, in fact, to have her send off, con a bunch of people into letting her, send a rocket to crash herself into a mountain, which, works actually fairly well as a comment on the self-destructive tendencies of the ultra-rich these days.
Yeah, no, I was thinking about that. I also, like, speaking of serendipity, happened to be watching a bunch of YouTube videos about scientific crackpots and their particular habits and what they have in common, and like the people who go off the rails when they fail out. And turn all of their resentment at the system and the way that the systems failed them, but or like if I can crack the big one, the crackpot, focus is never on like something small and actually solvable. It's always on the grand unified theory of everything, or
Right. Well,
proving relativity wrong or something.
yes.
It's like
Well,
and
and also that, there's definitely a thing where the crackpot is like, but I'm so smart.
right,
Clearly,
exactly.
clearly
I don't
everyone
need
else
to do
must
the
be
math.
wrong. Right, I don't need to do
Right.
the math. I'm so smart. But also, like, I think people turn to crackpottery often because they're so smart. How could they be failing? Clearly it's the system that's wrong. And sometimes it is the system that's wrong.
But that's the thing. It's like it's clear that the system has treated Desane badly here,
Right.
and hasn't taken her seriously, and hasn't fostered her actual skills and talents, and hasn't made a place for her magic, and is just sort of, you see that heartbreaking image from Desane's memory early, where the woman who made a magic lung basically
just like
smashes it.
Smashes it in front of her to be like, this is magic. It's not worth anything.
Right, exactly, because it's not replicable or falsifiable. And so, but it's clear that Desane does actually have something to offer. She is really special in a particular way. And but she's also a manipulative, psychopathic liar who doesn't care about destroying other people's lives.
Yes.
And
also, it's worth noting, I really like that in this book, like, it points out magic isn't replicable. If one person can do it, that's great for them and, the people around them if they're not a manipulative psychopath. But, if you actually want to help 1,000 people who need an artificial lung, you need something that isn't more than one person can create.
welcome to the Museum of Grievances. Here's your free ticket, come in. We've been trying to empty it for 50 odd years, but fresh grievances keep coming in, come in. Do you know, like, there's something so funny about it, because we haven't even talked about Assam yet, whose presence really looms largely over this book.
Yes, the sort of vaguely Christ-like figure, but again, not just a Christ analog.
Yeah, sort of, a pinch of Christ, a pinch of Buddha, a pinch of, but the Messiah of this world who
climbed the mountain.
Who climbed the mountain, but, climbed the mountain to die,
Yes, specifically to die.
Because, because he wasn't able to solve the basic problem of the world. And the hilarity of a world in which, like, the sort of, because everybody pretty in the empire, or the remains of the empire, pretty much follows this religion, or it's the religion that they don't follow,
Right.
But if somebody was like, okay, so Jesus went to got crucified, I'm going to make myself like a high-tech turbo cross and kill myself on it in a vast explosion that's visible from the entire country. You're
absolutely right.
It's so funny.
It is. No, it is. It's really funny. And, again, the fact that, like, by the time it happens, the novel has earned being really funny because it's done such a good job of commenting on all these other things.
And it's like you don't even register it as funny initially, because
oh, I don't know. I immediately registered the mental image of Desane rocketing off into the mountain and then just going poof. It's funny. But what else could Desane do, right?
Right. I mean, that's what she's supposed to do, And it's like, and the sheer sadness that and like unresolved weirdness that that our hero feels about Desane just makes this hilarious, like, going over Niagara Falls in a barrel thing, have such a weight of a tragedy in it, in addition to being really funny. It's a hell of a thing to pull off.
Yes. Well, and I mean, part of it is also that she's spent at this point quite some time covering for Desane's great lie that they made it to the top of the mountain.
Yes.
And so, she still feels this sort of weird love and guilt and obligation towards Desane, but, now it's a massive amount of resentment on top of that because Lamont did not resent Desane when Desane convinced her to do stuff that made her lose everything.
Yeah.
But she does resent Desane when Desane convinces her to lie.
Yeah.
And keep lying.
Which is interesting.
It's another great character moment. And so, so she's got all of this. And then, you're right, I mean, part of the tragedy there, even though it is, again, very silly, is that she actually did it. She did the thing that she kept saying that she did. There's this moment where, I can't actually remember if it's Lamont
which
or
is the thing that,
where one of them says, the mountain is eventually going to be, somebody will eventually summit the mountain. Oh, it's Lamont, because she says, somebody will eventually summit the mountain. It's not going to mean anything after what Desane did, because everybody believes that Desane has summited the mountain twice, once on foot and once via rocket.
right.
But, but still, somebody will do it. I would like it to be me, even though at this point it's probably not going to be.
Yeah, no, it's the fact that Lamont's entire life has basically been centered around this,
Yes.
And Desane not only does it, but she also ruins it.
Right.
As thoroughly as it is possible to ruin anything. But also, there's a way in which DeMott also ruined it by writing her book.
Yes, because she writes this book about, so this book about how she and her husband and her husband's lover and this other woman who Lamont is in love with, but who's having 8 different physical and mental breakdowns, decide that they're going to summit the mountain, and they go, and her husband's lover dies, and then the woman she's in love with dies, partly because it is, partly her husband's fault. And it's funny because she really dances around it. And so at first you're like, oh, her husband actually killed her. And then you're like, oh no, her husband didn't kill her. They just fought. Maybe she's being unfair and blaming him. But she makes this one brief aside about, her husband's hands around her throat and Kerr's, doctor precise kick to his head. And you realize that whatever went on down there wasn't as simple as they had a fight and Kerr decided to sit outside and freeze.
Yeah, no, it's sort of, if you want to view, us sort of taking a journey through Lamont's unpacking of her own life, this book is kind of her therapy in a way.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that she perseverates around Cora's death and she tells Cora's death 4 or 5 times, I think,
mm-hmm.
in a different way every way, and with more details or with a different focus, until we actually have something more approaching a complete,
and yet,
but we don't actually have a complete picture of it because I don't know what Cora was thinking or wanting at all.
Right.
And neither does Lamont.
And neither does Lamont.
And
they're pretty sure that she was going insane, that she was both, had early onset Alzheimer's and also various other mental issues. But again,
yeah.
At no point when she tells the closest thing that she tells of the full story to Kerr's death, she doesn't mention the fact that her husband was trying to murder her, Lamont, and Kerr stopped him. That's never integrated into the full narrative of Kerr's death.
Why did Lamont write her first book? It clearly wasn't for the money. Did she want to open up her own museum? Or was it just revenge on her city? It's very difficult. I mean, Lamont is in that position where she can't actually acknowledge the full extent of her trauma, or if not can't, then doesn't want to. And so we have to... All of the worst trauma in the book is in the asides.
Yes.
As with the ice wall climbing moment. There are a few others that I really liked. How she sort of, and this is one that really hit me because it's something I share in a way, not precisely, but it's something that I share, was when she talks about how children's toys make her sad.
Yeah.
And like, I have something similar, which is that I find like child's laughter and like clapping really unnerving. uh, I may edit that out because it's a weird thing to admit, but regardless, like I really relate to that statement, and it's like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, no, because it's like it's a safety, it's an image of a safety that I never had, you know.
Exactly.
And like, and so there's so much pain like just tied up in these little sentences that we skate past.
Right. And she, again, you know, we get almost no details about her marriage. Like, we find out that she was very much in love and that her husband was, you know, very publicly cheating on her with someone else's
Yes.
wife, and like she and the guy become friends.
Although she's like, oh, it's not as big a deal in Hollow culture, but
right, even though it's
still.
obviously was a big deal to her.
Yeah.
And, you know, and this thing where her husband really seems to have treated her quite badly, but she still makes a point of establishing that, you know, her husband spent half his nights with her and not with his lover.
Yes.
But also, again, there's this brief mention of her husband trying to choke her out. And you go, well, maybe this is one moment on the mountain. But then there's the scene where, you know, she's staying at her ex-husband's, she and Desane, because Desane has convinced her to go hit up her ex-husband for money, so that they can
Right.
go back up the mountain. And he's really awful to her the entire time. And then
Oh, God.
she's in bed, and the way that he just like casually comes in, climbs into her bed, and she gets, you know, and like he comes into her room, and by the time he's climbed into the bed, she's in a chair, and like and spends the entire night sitting there while he's sleeping in, you know, her bed, and she's just sitting there awake in a chair, and like that's really revealing of what their marriage must have been like.
Whew. Yeah, no, she can't really. I mean, it's clear to everybody else that this man is a complete asshole, and
Yes, and she keeps like wanting to put a positive spin on him.
Yeah, and to make a point about how pretty he is, and you know,
Right, and so it's just, again, she never talks about the things that really hurt her. She doesn't. There's nothing that really deeply hurts her that she actually says what happened.
And it's so, and the author finds such clever ways to have that pain sneak in anyway around the sides.
Yeah, until
I find,
like again, this is a sort of inefficiency. What I mean by this novel is efficient is that at no point, does the author, like, we get no memories of her childhood, and yet we have such a clear idea of her childhood. We only get her putting a positive spin on a handful of things in her marriage, and yet, boy, we get a clear picture of her marriage. And, you know, and she doesn't even talk that much about her relationship with O'Teal, but we also get a clear picture of how happy she is in her relationship with O'Teal.
Yeah, the warmth that comes through there is so real, and like, you know, it's kind of the saving grace of the book. The book would be so bleak and horrible if we didn't have that.
If we didn't know that, you know, she ends up with still a ton of trauma, but in a relationship that is loving and understanding. And she also gets a career out of it. You know, she gets excommunicated. She's, you know, she can't go back up the mountain. She decides that she no longer wants to go on the charismatic cult, proto-cult tour circuit that Desane is running. And so she goes to medical school. I love the world building detail in medical school is actually this really low class thing because it's what women do.
Yeah, which I think was essentially true, in various cultures at various times.
Yes, but also it's a combination to some degree of like it is the way that we sort of, any career that, you know, seems like a prestige career can become, you know, there's no career that is inherently prestigious. It's that people in power do it, you know? And
right, exactly.
This like academia has become increasingly less prestigious, especially the humanities, as more and more women join. You know, philosophy and history are the two still male-dominated humanities, and they're, you know, they're also the ones that are still more prestigious than, say, literary studies. So,
yeah.
And, you know, and so this is doctors. And the thing is that these are doctors who are very much the sort of natural scientists that we mythologize in this world. I mean, what's his face? Neil Stephenson wrote a whole terrible trilogy about it.
Which is also incidentally full of fake etymologies.
Right, but he was claiming that they were real. So, he's pretending that all the science and stuff he puts in there is real, and Isaac Feldman does a good job of making it clear that we are being bullshitted on multiple levels.
Yes.
But, and so, again, it's a really great way of pointing out that no career is inherently prestigious. We think of natural science and medicine, and, even though at the time, obviously, the grave robbers, resurrectionists, or whatever they were called, were and they were low class, and the people who made a lot of these original scientific discoveries were low class, but they were men, and our culture does mythologize them. But these are women, and so will their culture, will this society ever mythologize the fact that it looks like Oteil's on her way to discovering germ theory? No, probably not.
Each chapter of this book is prefaced with an excerpt from one of the many Gospels of a Psalm. I think the author left money on the table by not including a sorting hat mechanism, or at least a U-quiz for which one you should belong to. I personally prefer the Gospel of Worms, but I would 'cause I'm into the flesh, much like a worm is. Anyway, I'm not gonna make that quiz myself, but if you want to, please feel free. Now we're talking about Dessain. Do you have any more thoughts about Dessain?
I mean, it's it's almost hard to wrap. So actually, yes, I think because we were talking about sort of the tragedy of Dessain's story, and she's in some ways it's also very much sort of a metaphor for gifted kid burnout, right? Everybody makes such a big deal out of her that when she starts to fail, first she becomes brilliant but erratic, and then she just becomes a waste of her potential. And she actually has this, magic as a metaphor for art, creative gift, but that's not valuable because it's not replicable. And, you should not, if your gift is for creative interpretation and making things change by sheer force of your will, then probably you shouldn't be a physicist or biologist or chemist. But the creative interpretation maybe, but not the changing things by sheer force of your will. But, she could have had this career doing magic. But she got tracked into what was prestigious, and it wasn't where her gifts lay. And by the time she realizes where her gifts lay and leans into them, she's, realized also that the best way to live her life is by destroying other people's.
Yes.
And I really enjoyed the bits from her diary that Oteil makes a point of including, which is very much okay, you're saying all this stuff about, how sparkly. I love when Oteil's like, I'm willing to believe you that she has had some sort of intangible, sparkly charisma that is just not coming across on the page. But when I'm reading everything you say about her, she just comes off as sour and bitter and awful. And here's a bit from her diary where she's talking about you, and she still comes off as sour and bitter and awful.
Yeah. Yeah, very much so.
And because it's true, there are people like that. There are people who you describe them, and people will go, wow, they sound awful. And then they meet the person, they go, oh, wow, this person is great.
Yes, I've met and been related to those, yes.
Yes, we have both met, been related to, and fallen for the manipulations of that kind of person.
Indeed.
Which is probably how we ended up doing the podcast about wizards.
Yeah, I think so. I very much think so.
This is once again turned into Isaac and Alexis Therapy Hour. I apologize to our listeners again.
I felt like I needed to mention it like once because this is, it hews closely toward some biographical stuff.
Yeah.
But I will veer back away from that and just talk about a few of my favorite little moments from the book because there are some that I haven't managed to shoehorn in yet.
Great.
Let's talk
about little things we liked and nothing else.
I I love the thing where she talks about how readers don't want actual emotion in books.
Yes.
Because that's such a cheeky, like, have your cake and eat it kind of a thing to do.
Right.
But it's also really earned by that point, so I'm just like, ha, you know.
Also, this is a great example of, and it comes fairly early on in the book, which is, so that as you read more, you realize, oh, this is another example of Lamont is, saying something very confidently, assuming that you're going to believe her, and totally actually just using it as a dodge to talk about her feelings.
Yes, exactly. And I'm like, I don't think that's true, but I think that the fact that you think it's true says something very interesting about you.
Exactly. And the book is written very much in a way that, that you can believe that she can at least convince herself of this.
Yes. Or her, like, oh, you know how it is when people want to make themselves seem smart, so they pretend not to exactly remember a quotation, so it seems like they didn't have to look it up. And I'm like, no, I've never seen anybody do that. But you've certainly thought about you've thought about class and, and status and education a lot, clearly, and like, also you're a paranoid, angry person for a lot of really good reasons.
Mm-hmm.
It's so good. And the last thing that I wanted to mention was this actually, you know how sometimes things sneak around the back and help you understand something that you sort of hadn't actually internalized.
Mm-hmm.
The thing about how in the Hollow People's beliefs, the mountain only cares about what the Hollow People do on it.
Yes.
Like only their actions can hurt God really brought something home to me about Judaism that I don't think that I'd properly internalized.
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. It is very much a sort of, it is very similar to the sort of relationship with the mitzvot. It does not matter what other people do. We have this special relationship, and so we have to follow all of these arbitrary rules. Many of which I follow, note to our listeners. I keep a kosher kitchen.
But it's very much like, oh, why don't we proselytize? Well, it doesn't matter what the Gentiles are up to.
Exactly. And, this one, there's some obvious differences, like Judaism doesn't really excommunicate, and apostates can always come back. And, and the child of, somebody who was exiled from the community is, at least the child of a mother who would still be.
Yeah, we can't afford to lose people like that.
Right.
Really.
I mean, honestly,
from a practical perspective.
Neither can the Holo, but we all, every people has to make the decisions that it makes.
Yes, exactly. And one reason why we're still around is that we tend to go with the practical choice.
This is apparently Isaac and Alexis therapy hour, and also Isaac and Alexis justify why they're Jewish hour. Which is also, I guess, a form of therapy.
Yes, I suppose. I'm an open book on that one, and the book is in very large print. This just says spite over and over again. That's weird. But yeah, no. Do you have any?
I have some favorite moments to share, but share your last one first.
My last one is that are you familiar with magic surgery? It's the sort
surgery?
of. It's actually called psychic surgery. Sorry. Yeah, it's this thing where, and I think it's practiced in Latin America. I think mostly where there's a faith healer who who does sleight of hand and palms like guts, like animal guts and blood and goo and stuff, and sort of reaches into a person's body without breaking their skin,
mm-hmm.
and pulls out these red strands of like evil and goo from them,
mm-hmm.
and thereby heals them. And it's like street magic, but also faith healing,
mm-hmm.
and like the way that Desane pulls out her Lamott's love for her husband in a red strand,
in a red string. Yes.
Yeah,
and then
it
and
really
then Lamont
reminded me of that.
Yes, and that's another great moment where Lamont is like, "So is it gone now?" And for a second, it feels like it's gone, and then Dessain is like, "No, I'm just making your emotion manifest." And Lamont is like, "Oh,
Oh my God.
it feels like it should have like that we should have to pay something."
I mean, I don't, speaking of therapy time, like, I don't know if you've ever been faith healed, or been to some whack ass,
yes, by your mother and people she knows. You can edit that out if you'd like.
But I know it's important for my point. It's because it's like that whole, like, you go through the experience, whatever it happens to be. There's this guy who thinks he can communicate with you pre-consciously by forming your hands into mudras. I'm not making that up. That's real.
No, I believe you.
And, you as a teenager go there to be therapized by this guy who is, sort of casually also doing real therapy while he's doing this with your hands.
Mm-hmm.
But, it's but there are a lot of those things, and you can, like chiropractic or whatever, where it's like after it's over, you feel like you've been healed.
No, one of your,
and then 10 minutes later.
One of your mother's, quote unquote, doctors did that with me. And, it totally fixed my cramps for an hour and a half, and then they came back. Because, it turns out that, like, aura manipulation combined with talk therapy can have an effect, but it's not enough to actually overcome endometriosis.
I tried to dodge talking about my... but not very hard.
Yeah, no, the mind-body connection is real, but the body will insist.
Okay, now this has really gotten into Isaac and Alexis Therapy Hour, so I would like to pivot to some of my favorite moments.
Please do.
So, because otherwise I feel like we're going to have to start paying our listeners. And so, okay, so I love the moment where she says that, oh, for me, reading has always been a compulsion. And I don't say that in the vaguely boastful way that some people think of, speak of such compulsions. Which is a great way for her to both make it clear that, she has this weird relationship with reading, but also for her to take this moment to, again, be weirdly status conscious and defensive and jab at... She's real mean. And she's subtle about it, but she's real mean.
There's another one that's very similar to that. I think it might actually be part of the same digression, where she's like, I hate when people say, oh, they had no choice but to do so and so.
Oh, I had to do it or I would die. No, you would not die.
Because you wouldn't fucking die.
Says Lamont.
And it's like, I've had that exact thought in my resentment over people who, oh, I had to become a comedian. I don't know what I would have done otherwise. Fuck it, you would have worked a job,
Right.
If the dice hadn't fallen in your favor and you'd managed to make a living from this.
So for the benefit of our listeners who've not read the book, the Isaac's rant is basically a paraphrase of Lamont's exact same rant.
Right. Me and Lamont have a couple of things in common.
Yes. But yeah, so that was again, it's a great moment. It's a place where the book is really funny, even though it's not making a joke per se. And my other favorite moment of the book being really funny is when she goes, oh yeah, because this mountain is very clearly Everest. I mean, it's not Everest because, for one thing, it's like too tall. This is a magical world, a mountain this tall. As Lamont even points out, the scientists are like, the mountain can't be that tall. It would deform the spinning of the earth. So, this mountain is magically tall, but is in many ways still Everest. There's, a people that is the exploited guides, etc., and, that it's a status symbol for climbing. And there's this great moment where Lamont is like, actually climbing our mountain, I mean, you can't summit the mountain, but like climbing our mountain is real easy. It's not that prestigious. There's this one climber who, in fact, Dessain trained under, though she doesn't realize he's such a big deal, who I have never met because he's never come to our mountain because it wouldn't be a challenge. And that's such, again, it's great shade both on the people in the book, but also on the people who climb Mount Everest.
Exactly. Yeah. One more silly little thing.
Mm-hmm.
This book came out the same year that the video game Celeste came out. And Celeste, if you don't know, if our audience doesn't know, is a game which is about climbing a mountain, and B, about individuating by climbing a mountain, and C is also a trans allegory. And there is a throwaway bit character in this book named Celeste, and I'd like to think that that's a shout out. And if it is, excellent.
I have not played Celeste, and thus I didn't even notice that there was a character in there.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Anyway, you guys should definitely read this book. It's not even that long.
It's not even that long, but it's like it's so good. I mean, I have to read all of Feldman's other stuff.
Like I said, I just got an email from the library that my hold on another of his books has come in. So
cool. Let me know how that one goes and whether we can.
It does not appear to be about lesbians, but perhaps we can do it as a bonus episode.
Indeed.
Anyway, I will also note The Breath of the Sun. It was the 2019 Lambda Literary Award winner. Totally deserved.
We've done 3 Lambda Award winners, and they've all been really good.
Honestly, it's funny. I feel like the Lambda Awards actually tend to have better taste in or at least a taste that is more like mine, in science fiction fantasy than the Nebulas, which is the industry award.
Well, I mean, I guess we've said there's a reason that we've done the wizard part of Wizards versus Lesbians, but there's also a reason that we do the lesbian part of Wizards versus Lesbians. And it's not just because of the zeitgeist and the current lesbian fiction boom. It's because there is even though queer desire isn't the revolutionary moment, queerness certainly makes things more interesting, or can.
Yep.
So,
it can, I think. Can.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
It is, in fact, we are partially documenting the way in which that is less and less true. As the
right.
But,
yes. Also, I will say the rhythms of the narrative voice are a little bit like The Fortunate Fall, which I think to some degree is what you're saying about it being, literary. But it is.
This isn't a
no
mess
other
the way
way
that The Fortunate Fall is.
No, exactly. This is
this is a finely crafted, novel in which things have been really paid attention to.
Yeah, this is one of those things that could have been a glorious mess, but the author actually pulled it off, I think.
Agreed.
So, well done,
yes.
Isaac Feldman.
Thank you. I have no idea where we're going. In what order we're going to publish these things now, so I'm just going to not say what we're doing next time.
I figured we'd publish this one and then Some Desperate Glory, which has gotten shoved down the list several times, but I do really want to talk about.
Yes. So next time, at long last, Some Desperate Glory, and until then, bye-bye.
Bye.
We didn't get to mention how Lamont draws attention to the fact that she's writing like a Southerner, as opposed to like a Hollow who writes in a sort of more Virginia Woolf than Hemingway way. And there's our Hemingway gag again. The punchline is, of course, that the book is written in a secret third way. It's so very clever. It's clever. This book is very, very clever.